They say money reveals the truth about people. But what if death could do the same? This is the story of a billionaire who vanished from his own world, letting whispers of his death spread like wildfire. He wanted just one thing: to see who truly loved him beyond his wealth. But when the curtains of deception lifted, what he discovered was far darker than betrayal. It was a chilling truth about his own bloodline, a truth soaked in greed, hidden prejudice, and a cruelty he never thought his children could carry. And when he finally revealed himself, their reaction stunned the family. Kwame Mensah had everything a man could want. At least that's what the world believed. A sprawling mansion filled with priceless art, fleets of cars gleaming in the sunlight, and children who never wanted for anything. To outsiders, his life was a picture of success. But behind the locked doors of his estate, a quieter storm was always brewing. His family. Kwame had 3 children: Daniel, the eldest, sharp and ambitious; Grace, the middle child, elegant but distant; and Samuel, the youngest, whose charm masked a restless hunger for more. On the surface, they loved their father. They smiled at dinners, accompanied him to charity galas, and spoke fondly of him in interviews. Yet Kwame, a man trained by life to see beyond appearances, often caught glimpses that unsettled him. Daniel counting his estate's paintings with an appraising eye, Grace whispering with lawyers about future trusts, Samuel questioning why money was tied up in foundations instead of his personal account. What hurt him most was not their questions, but the absence of another: love. Rarely did they ask about his health, his happiness, his fears as he grew older. Their eyes glittered not with affection but with calculation. To them, he feared, he was no longer a father, but a vault waiting to open. And so, as days turned into nights, Kwame wrestled with a question heavier than any business deal he had ever faced. If I were gone tomorrow, would my children cry for me, or only for what I left behind? The thought consumed him, until one night he made a decision that would change everything. He would test their hearts in the cruelest way possible. He would let them believe he was dead. The plan was executed with precision. One morning, the news broke across every major outlet. Billionaire philanthropist Kwame Mensah passes away after sudden illness. The story spread like wildfire. Social media flooded with condolences. Business partners expressed shock, and journalists scrambled to publish glowing tributes. But inside the family mansion, the reactions were nothing like what the world imagined. Daniel, the eldest, was the first to respond. His eyes didn't water, they sharpened. Within hours, he was already in the study, going through his father's documents, speaking to the estate lawyer, his voice steady, almost businesslike. To outsiders, grief paralyzed families. But to Daniel, this was an opportunity, a transfer of power he had secretly anticipated for years. Grace, elegant as ever, shed tears at the memorial service. But Kwame, watching from afar in disguise, noticed something telling. Her sobs dried quickly when the guests left, replaced by quiet conversations with bankers and a jewelry appraiser who had been discreetly invited to the estate. Her grief felt rehearsed, as though every tear was staged for the watching eyes of the public. And Samuel, the youngest, the one Kwame once believed to be the warmest of all, reacted with reckless abandon. Nights turned into parties, expensive cars roared through the gates, and his father's wine cellar was emptied bottle by bottle. Instead of mourning, Samuel treated death like liberation, a chance to finally indulge without restraint. What struck Kwame the hardest was the absence of what he had secretly hoped for: love. Not once did Daniel pause to reminisce about childhood memories. Not once did Grace ask to see her father's diaries or letters. Not once did Samuel wander into his study, searching for some fragment of wisdom to hold on to. The mansion buzzed with lawyers, bankers, and accountants, but no prayers, no whispers of longing, no sign of aching hearts missing their father's presence. The funeral itself was a spectacle. Cameras flashed, mourners wept, dignitaries delivered speeches about Kwame's legacy. Yet behind closed doors, his children were already dividing him, asset by asset, estate by estate. Daniel negotiated properties, Grace obsessed over art collections, Samuel demanded liquid cash. The family dinners that followed were no longer filled with laughter or stories, but tense debates over shares, wills, and control. But what Kwame hadn't anticipated was how deep their greed ran, not just toward him, but toward each other. Old rivalries resurfaced. Daniel accused Grace of manipulation. Grace accused Samuel of recklessness. Samuel accused Daniel of scheming. What was once a family, fragile as it may have been, fractured into open hostility. And Kwame, hidden among the shadows of his own funeral, watched in silence as his bloodline tore itself apart over the empire he had built with his hands. Yet the deepest cut came not from their greed, but from something far darker. In satire, whispered conversations, in carelessly spoken words, Kwame uncovered a painful truth. His children had not only lost respect for him, they had begun to despise his very identity. Daniel referred to his father's legacy as too tied to old roots. Grace suggested rebranding the family name to something more global. And Samuel, in drunken rage one night, mocked his father's heritage outright, calling it backward and a weight that dragged them down. Kwame had expected greed. He had even prepared himself for betrayal. But he had not been ready for this. For his own children to be ashamed of who he was, of the color of his skin, of the heritage that had shaped his life story. And in that moment, watching the people he had raised desecrate not just his memory but his very identity, Kwame realized his experiment had uncovered more than selfishness. It had exposed something poisonous growing within his own family. The night of revelation came without warning. It was late, the estate quiet after another day of arguments between the siblings. Daniel had locked himself in the study, crunching numbers with a lawyer. Grace was in the grand hall, on the phone with a buyer for the art collection. Samuel lounged by the pool, half drunk, blasting music into the night. And then, the doors opened. At first, no one noticed. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in a plain suit, walking slowly but with purpose. The air seemed to thicken with every step. When the siblings finally turned their eyes toward him, the glasses slipped from Grace's hand. Daniel froze mid-sentence. Samuel sat up, his drunken haze evaporating instantly. It was their father, alive, breathing, standing before them with a gaze so cold it silenced the entire house. For a moment, no one moved. It was as though a ghost had entered their world. Kwame did not shout. He did not rage. His silence was sharper than any words. He let the weight of his presence crush them before he finally spoke, his voice low, steady, filled with disappointment deeper than death itself. "I gave you everything," he said, "but I wanted to know, if I gave you nothing, would you still have given me love?" The room trembled with his words. Daniel stammered excuses about handling the estate responsibly. Grace tried to cry again, but the tears would not come. Samuel laughed nervously as though it were all a twisted joke, but the truth was undeniable. Their actions had already betrayed them. And then Kwame revealed what he had witnessed. Their greed, their endless arguments, their contempt for his heritage. He repeated their very words back to them, each syllable slicing through the air. They could no longer hide. Their masks had been ripped away. The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first time, His children saw not their father, but the man they had destroyed with their selfishness. Kwame had given them life, wealth, and protection, but they had given him only betrayal. And now, standing before the family that had failed him, he was ready to decide their fate. Kwame stood there, surrounded by silence so heavy it seemed to bend the walls of the mansion. His children shifted nervously, searching for words that could not be found. But Kwame had already heard enough. His test was complete, and the truth was undeniable. Slowly, he walked across the room, his footsteps echoing like a judgment drumbeat. His eyes lingered on Daniel, whose ambition had turned to greed, on Grace, whose elegance had soured into vanity, on Samuel, whose charm had dissolved into reckless indulgence. He saw not the children he had once carried in his arms, but strangers who wore his blood but not his love. "You wanted my empire," Kwame said quietly, "but not my name, not my struggles, not my heart. You wanted the wealth of my hands but despised the color of my skin, the very root that gave you life." His voice cracked, not with anger, but with sorrow so deep it left his children trembling. And then came the final blow. With deliberate calm, Kwame announced that his fortune would not be theirs. The businesses, the estates, the art, all of it would be redirected into foundations, scholarships, and community projects. His empire, he declared, would serve those who knew the value of struggle, dignity, and heritage, not those who squandered it. The room erupted. Daniel shouted, Grace pleaded, Samuel cursed. But Kwame did not flinch. For the first time, he was not the provider, not the protector. He was simply a father who had finally seen the truth. As he walked out of the mansion, leaving his children behind in stunned silence, he felt a strange peace. The experiment had broken his heart, but it had also freed it. He had given them everything, and in return, they had given him clarity. Sometimes, he thought, death does reveal the truth, not of the world, but of family. And as you hear this story, ask yourself, if you were stripped of all you owned, who in your family would still love you, and who would only mourn the money left behind?